No way, bro.
And I saw this commercial, I've seen it a couple of times. It's just 15 seconds, but if you want to come up with a commercial about market segmentation by channels, this is perfect. It hits all the buttons, okay? So, without further ado. See, I'm not strange. So many people do this that even Domino's recognizes it now. All right. I'm not the only one who goes out and picks up the pizza. What they're also talking about that I think it's really interesting is they talk to the fact that online you can give a tip. They need to go pick up the pizza. All right. And so like they have this little tip place, and we got in a conversation about it as marketing. But what I find interesting about this is Domino's is giving you a $3 coupon to come pick up your pizza. And I think that is brilliant. And it is a perfect example of how you go about marketing or segmentation by channel. And it works. It's great. So anyway, I just wish I liked Domino's. Maybe Papa John's will do it.
They give you $3 to go.
What's that?
They give you $3 credit.
Yeah, they give you $3 credit, if you go pick it up. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, they charge a lot. My buddy did some other day.
Yeah,
And he said he wasn't gonna get delivered. And then he was like, they're charging 10. And it was Domino's.
yeah. And they're fighting that thing because they're charging service fees, which the others aren't. You know what? I haven't had a delivery. I don't even know if everyone else is doing it. That's a good question.
I don't know if Hungry Howie's you gotta tip them.
Yeah, I mean, I worry so much about what goes on with my food. I tip everybody,
Yeah.
When
you didn't tip last time, and now you won't order again because things are gonna spit his food.
Yes, yeah, I worry about that. Yeah. You're not alone. And I want to know who came up with the rules that said the sharing of the fries goes on for everybody in an Uber drive. Oh, well. Let's see. All right, so we're going to finish chapter 2. We're going to go on to chapter 3. And so we talked about the service outputs. Before I leave the service outputs, there's an example I kind of want to make sure that I go over again. And it is the fact that there's one thing, excuse me, there's one thing in here that has been left out and isn't exactly a service output, and it's price. Price is not a service output. Price is what the customer pays to consume the goods. It is significant in that we do make choices with service outputs that have that have cost involved, and that we do make trade-offs. But the actual answer to that is that cost is not a service output. Even though there are people that are very conscious of the cost of things. The last thing on, and this is not necessarily a test thing, but service outputs may not be exhaustive. There may be others out there. It's just that as of now, these are the ones that we take the most note of. And generally, you can take any of the service outputs and they all come under the same banner. So that was kind of the last thing I wanted to be able to put out there. Now, so how do we go about segmenting by service output? Well, the first thing we have to recognize is we have to recognize that there are end users that differ not in the products they want to buy, but how they want to buy them. Domino's in and of themselves didn't do anything with their pizza. But what they did was they created a market segment that are those individuals who are not affected by spatial convenience, or let's just say have flexibility, are cost conscious in a way, but this is an example. So you want to be able to look at it in different ways. They use this one as a custom tailor. I have a friend of mine who lives in New Orleans, who's actually a tailor, did that when he was young. Asked him, how does he get so well at it? And he says, well, you learn to get their pants off. And I asked him what he meant by that. He said, well, the first thing that he says is, why don't you try those on? So that's usually his first line. By the way, just in case I'm gonna go dad on you for a second, in case your parents haven't decided a graduation gift, may I recommend a tailored suit? I mean, a tailored suit. Everybody deserves once in their lifetime a piece or a garment that was only made for them. All right, just a recommendation. If they're asking, a tailored suit may not necessarily be something you spend money on yourself, but everybody deserves one. All right, so just think of that. Okay. All right, so what are the the steps? So the first thing that we would do is generate a comprehensive list of all of the service outputs that are desired by the end users. The end users being the consumers, whether they happen to be companies or not. And so we might make a list that says what is important. We would come up with this as like a study. And let's say, we'd say fast service. Let's say warranty work. Let's say support after the sale. And let's just say information. All right. So we would put these things down. We would look at the market that we were trying to target, and we would try to find ways of collecting this information. We would use, anybody done marketing research yet? Okay, so we would collect these online. We use like an online survey program called Qualtrics. We would ask our particular group, what are these things? We would put together this list, and it's really interesting to actually go through the process and you run the software. We would do something called exploratory factor analysis. And what it would do is, let's say there's 400 people in the study. It would take those 400 data sets, those 400 pieces of information, and it would actually dump them into or let's just say unique kinds of silos where these people belong together and these people belong together and these did. All right. And the way that they would do this is that they would consider them by those that everything that they are and nothing that they're not. And so like market segment means that when you're building the group, it is collectively exhaustive. In other words, it is everything that it is. And then different between groups means mutually exclusive. It's nothing that it isn't. And that's a way to think of a definition. It's everything that it is and nothing that it isn't. And it splits on differences that matter in the building of the distribution system. So you feed this data in, you run an exploratory factor analysis. You could tell it how many, if you wanted to, tell it how many number of groups to break it down in. I mean, you could tell it that, or you could just tell it, just give me the groups that are together. Sometimes you may find only 2 or 3, but that's how it works. So anyway, once you do that and they break down and you look at the segmentation and what they consider valuable, then you give it a name. And the name generally is something that is valuable or important to you. So you understand it. When you name the segment, you're giving a face to this actual group, this segment, this market segment, okay? An example of a market segment by the way that people use things, an example of a market segment could be skateboarding individuals. So like Skechers, they look at what people do. Market segmenting on how people get their things is the example of the people for Domino's who go pick it up themselves. That's the example. So there's just one more problem we've got. So setting it up like this, what's the problem with this? What's the problem with this? Test question set.
They're all important though.
Yes, that's the exact answer. Right, that's the answer. That's the problem. This is what's known as preference difficulties. This is why you need to take marketing research, folks, for my wife, because she'll make sure that the questions are done right. She's never told me when I've done something right. She makes sure that when it's wrong. If I were to make this, you would say it doesn't make sense because it could all be important. You can use one thing, what's called a constant sum scale. It is a research tool that we use. A constant sum scale breaks down by what is important. A constant sum scale recognizes that we have limited resources and that we can only focus on certain things at a time, and that it is our natural tendencies to rank things. Usually constant sum scales have a fixed total of 100. And the reason why is that constant sum scales, I didn't trip over this time, is all about percentages, all right? So if you look at it, with it adding up to 100, 40 people said fast service was first. 30 people said customer service, technical support, and then training. So the numbers, folks, when you get to be, excuse me, when you get into that next level, all right, the numbers speak to you. You got to listen to them, all right? And so I'm looking at this, and the first thing I'm saying to myself is the number one thing that they need is service. And not only that, but the service doesn't necessarily look like it's after the sale, because technical support is 20 and training is only 10. And so that leads me to be making an inference, as anybody would. I would say that they have some kind of technical support already there, or this group is confident and they're confident in what they understand. But what they want is they want the goods when they want it, when they need it, and everything else in between. I would think probably I would work on financing just to make sure I've got all this right. And so with all of these things together, I'm now starting to come up with a picture. And now I'm part of that part 2 step or part 2 and 3 step where I can name the segment. And I could almost come here and name the segment and say, high service, little post support. I could say that. And I would have created a picture. So let's take a real survey that was done by CDW, and they used constant sum scales. They broke it down and named them. And now we can kind of look and put this together in our heads to see what it means. So we have 4 different groups. Each one of those, if you notice the percentages of what they consider to be important are broken down. You'll also notice that the percentage of respondents, if you take these numbers, they all add to 100, okay? And that's what they should, because it's all of the respondents together. And then they used a constant sum scale to determine within the group what is most important for that group. So let's look at it. The first one is lowest price, and that is the highest. Lowest price is the number one thing. So the first inference says to me is that they consider the other things not important, and they don't. They don't care about an ongoing relationship. Installation somewhat, they don't really care about it being responsive to solving. I'm adding all of those together and saying after sales support is less than 20%. I go up and I can see they may want product demonstrations, they may want proactive consulting. Everything is in the front end before the sale. And if you look up there, lowest total cost, pre-sales information segment. Making inferences about this group, I would say they have a big technical support group. However, they need beginning information, and I would guess that this is part of a corporation where you have a buyer who okays the sale, but you have support after the sale that needs to be taken care of. So that's how I would look at it, and it's 16% of the respondents. Do I choose that one? The way I would choose that one is to determine whether or not the assets that my corporation have are ideally suited for that group. You cannot separate one without the other. You need to be able to think about your group and know whether you can fit in that. Now, the next group has the lowest price, is one of the lowest, but responsive problem solving after the sale is very high. So responsive support post-sales segment. And if you actually look at post-sales, 40% here, 55%, over 50% needs help after the sale. Well, they have product demonstrations, proactive consulting, those are high, but they don't care about a one-stop solution, which is kind of funny. All right. Maybe they're doing bids, I'm not quite sure, but they don't really care about that. They want all the support after the sale. So once again, do I want to go with this group? Well, they're not concerned with price. That's not important. Do I have the facilities to support this? That would be my answer as to whether to go after that. Now, the third group, once again, they don't care about lowest price. They care about a full service relationship. So if you notice, their numbers are balanced and they want a one-stop solution. They want a long-term partnership. If you look at these numbers, 1/3 of their response is some kind of solution that stays with me long and enduring. And so I actually, if I had the same resources with a different message, I might be able to capture this one and that one. And that's nearly 3/4 of the entire market. Now, the last one's kind of bizarre. They don't care about price. They care a little bit about installation. They don't care to respond. They have no reason to have an ongoing relationship, but they have all of this front end stuff. So references and financial stability, product demonstrations, proactive consulting, all that stuff. But that's all in the beginning. It kind of lends me to think this is probably a franchise that gets a lot of their consulting from a franchisee. And so all of this, they don't need any of that. It's not as important as it is to make sure that whatever you're doing is qualifiable. So which one do you go after? The answer, we're not gonna, if we were to have this or anything like it, if you just give me rational reasons why I should choose one of those, I'd be good with it. There are many times that I've given students questions in essays and students have exactly the opposite answers. But if you give me a rational reason, give me a reason to believe you, I'll take it, all right? So, enlighten me. Okay, so realize there's a trade-off between price and service outputs, as I said. Recognize that a segment's demand for has to really reflect a willingness to pay for them. And last is it's very likely that one channel strategy is going to satisfy all the needs of all of the segments. It's just the nature of the beast. All right. So to target them requires you to figure out what part of them is attractive. So you take that list that we just did, choose the segments you want to identify, and you customize the solution to sell to that targeted segment. Just like market segmentation by product attributes, the consumers that you desire, and then building that particular marketing message that would get them. Because believe me, as a Domino customer, I got this. All right. I get it. Very well done. Okay. So targeting is choosing to focus on a segment, choosing with the goal of achieving sales or profits. And just remember that targeting means also choosing not which to target. And hopefully, choosing the right service outputs will provide you with a long-term market, or perhaps design even a new one. So when Fandango came out, Fandango was one of those corporations that was targeted after those individuals with a very high spatial convenience who have a low waiting or delivery time. In other words, wanted immediate and with a broad assortment of variety. Now, let me also say that this long waiting and delivery time, the omni-channel has totally thrown out to kilter and made it crazy, right? Because waiting and delivery time now comes down to zeros. But I think all of us who are shipping or getting our things for Amazon are recognizing things are taking a lot longer. I mean, they are. However, Fandango was built with these outputs: broad assortment of variety, higher spatial convenience, waiting and delivery time, and time-constrained moviegoers. It is amazing that this segment has expanded now. You can get licenses online. If you're a hunter, you can get your fishing licenses and your other licenses online. I was watching something on this last night. You can carry it with you at all times. There are so many things that are going on with the omni-channel. It's just amazing. So this is just an example for a particular market segment. And once again, it's done very well. All right, so that is chapter 2. And now move on to chapter. So there's always a difficulty of knowing whether or not you're satisfying what consumers want. Many times we get it wrong, or that consumer taste changes and suddenly the rug is pulled out from under us. So when I was in my 20s, one of the places that we went to get movies was Blockbuster. And Blockbuster was one of these places that literally had everything. The Blockbuster had not only the movies to rent, it had the candies to eat, it had blank tapes, it had anything to do with cinema, and it was actually a gathering place. A Friday afternoon at a Blockbuster's after 5 o'clock, and people were getting off was a madhouse. I swear to you, there were lines going out the door. It was a phenomenon. However, as things happen, people change. And it really changed when this one little red box came along, which was named.
Red box.
Yes, it was the leading one. Okay. Yes, it was called Red Box. And what they found were that consumers, once again, if we give consumers the choice to perform certain channel functions and give them a break, they'll do it. I would argue that the past decade has been about moving channel structures down, I don't know, right, downward, allowing consumers to perform channel functions and giving them the discount. And that's exactly what had happened when it came to Redbox. Not only that, but instead of having one or two Blockbusters in the city, you could have a Redbox in front of every CVS and Walgreens in the city, and you would still not have enough. And so these are the reasons why we need to audit the channels, is quite simply is to identify the segments and then understand whether we're providing service for them or not. We need to be able to evaluate the channel members' capability of producing service outputs. Auditing requires us to identify what channel functions are being done by whom, at what levels, and at what cost. Who's doing what, by whom, how much is it costing?
Can I shut that door?
Yeah. So what are the benefits of auditing? Well, you can find shortcomings in the provisioning of service and the price of service. You can find gaps, such as you find that happened with Blockbuster. That kind of gap was service supplied is greater than the service demanded. You can also have service supplied as less than the service demanded, and I would give you singles in terms of records, and I'll talk about those later. And the last one is it helps members allocate channel profits equitably. And what this basically means is that you reward individual channel members for the work that they do. Doesn't sound fancy. It's called the equity principle. And wherever the equity principle gets out of kilter, that's when you start to have things like conflict. And so you want to be able to allocate your channel profits equitably. And this also means in some form of compensation to end users. And so Domino's, in their compensation to the end users, I'm sorry, I keep going back to it, but they provide money. And as I said, when we can learn to shift these things and allocate them, there's always a greater chance of finding in the market. So, without further ado, we're going to visit those wonderful Channel 9 functions again, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit more detail and why we need to be able to audit them and find out equitably what we need. So that's all those functions. We saw what they look like, how horrible and ugly they were. And we're going to go on. And before we go on, I want to first say that each function carries a cost. This is a test question. It's important to recognize that with every function, we don't get it free. That every value we provide to the consumer comes with a cost that we have to deal with. And the key to whatever we're doing, the key is that we provide exactly the value that consumers want given the cost. Because there's nothing so wasteful as performing unnecessarily well. And I'll say that again before we leave. We want to be able to perform and give exactly what consumers ask for and nothing more. Okay. So we are now going to step through those 9 magic functions, and these will be the definitions that will be used for the test. So, as we talked about in the we first said that physical possession and ownership can be separate. That is true. But we also recognize that in the majority of cases, we acknowledge that physical possession and ownership flow together. And because we do that, we link both of those together in a term that we call inventory holding cost. Now, you might want to balk a little bit and think about it because inventory is supposed to be an asset, and assets are on the left side of the balance sheet. And if it's listed under an asset right under cash, why are we calling it a cost? Well, because it is, all right? We need inventory. We need inventory, otherwise we can't sell. However, inventory is a deal with Faust, and it is a bargain sometimes that's made with the devil. And so let me kind of give you an idea of how this can happen. So the inventory holding cost, what really makes it dangerous is that when we couple it with a concept known as turnover. So does anybody want to tell me what turnover means? This doesn't mean employee turnover. Yes.
Like inventory turnover is like how fast you sell a product.
Right, exactly. That's exactly it. So here's the example. Usually it is expressed in a ratio, all right? So I have 1,000 goods of inventory in January. I buy 1,000 goods during the year. And in December, at the end of the year, I have $1,000 in inventory. The inventory turnover equals 1. Turnover is how many times all of the assets for sale are sold, all right? How many times I strip everything from the shelves and sell everything that I've had. So this is a big ratio. You supply chain people, this is what's important to you. What happens if the turnover rate drops below 1?
It's negative,
Yes, and what does that mean?
I guess, that you still have the product.
Yes, exactly. That's the problem. If I go a year and I still have goods that I started the end of the year with, that's bad. Because what it means is that 20% of the inventory that's still available is money that I do not have for capital to put into other things that I need. It means that I might have it, if it's a non-durable good, it may be eaten up to the point where it's unusable. It could be electronics, where the half-life of electronics now is about 6 months, and it's been that way for 30 years. So that's might be possible. This is the danger of inventory, and why inventory is bad, even though you need it to be able to work. So how did we solve this? quick venture into the past to give you an idea of why inventory turnover is so important. In the 70s, you started to see things coming out of manufacturing that were actually invented in the US. They went to Japan, got better, and they came back. Concept, one of them is karitsu, which is long-term relationships with vendors, which means that instead of buying all 10 million at one time, I'll order 10 million and I'll only want 1,000 at a time. That would be an example of karitsu. The next is just in time, and just in time manufacturing requires me to draw something up. Okay, so this is my bad rendition of an automobile, all right? And so let's say this automobile takes 30 days to make, all right? However, it's not just one automobile on the conveyor belt, there's 100,000 vehicles, but it takes 30 days from the first bolt down to the last windshield wiper. So in order to start, the first thing I have to do is I have to get a frame, all right? Now the frame comes from somewhere else. So it means that I have to order it. I have to make the frame built and I have to have the frame shipped. And so let's say it takes 2 weeks to ship the frame and it takes 2 weeks to build the frame. Just in time and material requirements planning states that if I am going to start here, that it means in the past, at least 4 weeks before, I need to order the frame. This is what was known, and you'll find it, you'll see it, it's called MRP, Material Requirements Planning. It's also Material Resource Project, I believe. The anachronisms go on. But watch what happens. I ship it, 2 weeks to build, 2 weeks to ship. It's time to make this one car. I reach for the frame and literally just in time, it gets to the dock. They slap it in my hands and I put it in and I start building the car. Material requirements planning means is that if this car has 5,000 separate items in it, it means that there are 5,000 plans that are going on to make sure that every single piece of equipment comes in time and there's no inventory. So just think about that. Just think about all the cash that's not tied up in inventory. This was like the revolution in the 70s and the 80s. It's rebounded all over the world. But the crazy thing that it was doing to inventory turnovers are that turnovers, instead of being 1, they were becoming like 45 and crazy stuff. All right. Now, the problem with this is, and the difficulty is quite simply, is things take time. And the other part of that is being a computer guy, the system is at 90% of capacity. And if you've ever done anything computers, when you 90% anything, it's going to break. And that's what happened in the last 2 years. And there's a lot of this that we're going through right now. You supply chain people are now in year 1 because we're going from just in time to maybe just in case. So I wanted to flow through this to give you an idea of why inventory is important, but it can be also pretty awful. So having said all of that, the question you ask is, why keep inventory? Well, the first reason is that demand can outstrip supply. Demand can outstrip supply. Too much, too fast, too quick. And so there's no way to balance it. The next is the economies of scale. And so with economies of scale, you might be able to handle the processing of 10,000 at the same cost of 1,000. And this is where the kyoritsu comes in, when you can order in the economies of scale sizes, but you deliver by a fragmented date. Because I mean, truthfully, you're not going to have all 1 million of any good made in one moment. It's more efficient for them to plan 100,000 in a month. I mean, and it also takes care of seasonal variances too. The next is transportation takes time. Ask anyone who's watching all of those not tankers, but all of those container ships. And then the last is that demand and supply are uncertain. And so what this little diatribe is basically to help you kind of understand. I know I'm going to miss that meeting, sorry. Okay, I want to. Anyway, so these are the difficulties with physical possession and ownership, okay? And why you do think of them together, and why you want to move them as fast down the channel as you possibly can, but only at the exact time that you need them. The next is promotion, which are any of the activities that seek to increase the awareness. They go downstream mostly, whether they're pushed through or pulled through, either one. Negotiation is present in the channel if the terms of the sale or the persistence of the relationships are open for negotiation. It means quite simply, in unstable kinds of environments, there's a much greater need for negotiation than at others. Oh, financing. See if I can do this right. I've got it wrong. Anybody tell me what that means? Oh, I'm sorry. That looks bad. I gotta do better at my penmanship. Maybe this will make it easier.
Well, the N30 is like the amount of days that you have to get your discount off.
Yeah. N does mean something, and the 2 means something.
Is that the percent?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, exactly. So what that means is 210 net 30, in case you ever see it. 210 means that if you pay within 10 days of receiving your invoice, that you can put a 2% discount on the invoice itself and take 2% off. It may not sound like much, but if you've got like $10 million in invoices every year, that's $200,000. The next is that if you can't pay within 2 days, then you in essence pay net in 30 days. Now, that is quite an amazing thing, because what you're saying is that the seller is willing to forego income on that amount for 30 days. So think about that. So I sold you this equipment. I'm going to wait 30 days for you to deliver that money to me. It means I'm giving you a 30-day free loan before you can pay that. And it kind of gives you an idea of what goes on. It's one of the other reasons that if you ever get in your own business, I strongly urge you to get good credit references and to have trade partners who go net 30. It's a Mendoza line closes. Usually for there, you have to go COD cash or check or things like that. So net 30 is big. Think about if you're Walmart and it's net 45 and you have 2 billion in accounts receivable and in accounts payable, and you got $2 billion to play around for 45 days. Yeah. But when you think about what the seller's going through, you understand where risk is in. And where risk is in uncertainties in the channel when it comes to financing and when it comes to physical possession as well. They follow each other very closely. And now ordering and payment are all of those costs that are incurred that usually or always flows upstream. And then finally, information sharing, which flows both ways. And this is that question that I said that is the most important of the channel functions. And that's the sharing of sales trends, technical support, any information content that any of the people in the channels are willing to share. All right. Now, I've said these things before about channel functions, so you kind of know what they say, that channel members can specialize in one. You can remove one channel member, but you can't remove the functions that they do. You can't eliminate the functions. All of the functions have to be played out. There are some exceptions where you'll have duplications, like when a direct salesperson and an independent sales rep will call on the same person. It is a waste of effort, and it can also be a real pain. It can be a source of major conflict. You'll find this when we're going to go through the three major questions: buying or selling, dual distributor, those three questions. Oh, and one more thing, and this is a maxim more than anything else. So I talked about this before, and what this maxim states is cost of performing channel functions demands that the functions are not performed unnecessarily well. The cost, once again, because costs in channels are the most of all the four P's, the cost of performing the channel functions demands that the functions are not performed unnecessarily well. And if you need a definition of unnecessarily well, I refer you back to Blockbuster. Blockbuster, by the way, just to let you know, had a blue box, and they were ready to come out with something that was going to match the red box. I actually remember a working model, but they decided that the model did not fit their particular market strategy, and unfortunately, they went out of business. Okay, we're done for today. I will see you all Wednesday. Take care.
I'm not going to let it.